everyone. Sorry about that. Just had some slight technical issues with the camera, but hopefully it's all fixed now. Um, Thankfully I have a really amazing production manager. He hasn't officially had that title yet, but yeah, so he's behind the scenes sorting out all of the technical things and making this work seamlessly. And is absolutely incredible. So a big thank you to Ashley. Yeah, so we'll get cracking on with the book in a second. It did give me a chance to get a nice hot drink. I've gone for a hot Vimto, which is a new addition to my hot drinks range recently, but absolutely a big winner. So if anyone wants to, in our next break, get themselves a hot juice, then 10 out of 10 recommend a hot Vimto, absolutely. So, where were we? We'd just met back up with Prince Renko and the monk, and they have teamed up together basically, and they're now on their way to carry out this mission that Prince Renko is going on to save themselves from the Gold Eaters, the Spanish. So, silence. The chants and shouts of the Incan hordes were gone now. In the darkness of the murky river, I followed Renko's kicking feet into a circular stone pipe that was set into the underwater wall of the city. It was difficult to pull myself through the submerged cylindrical tunnel. Its confines were so narrow, and it seemed to go on for an eternity. But then, just when it seemed as if my lungs would burst, I saw the end of the pipe and the rippling waves of the surface beyond it. I pulled myself harder through the water towards them. I arose inside an underground sewer of some kind, lit by flaming torches mounted on the walls. I was standing waist-deep in water, damp stone walls surrounding me, square-shaped stone tunnels stretched away into the darkness. The foul stench of human feces filled the air. Renko was already wading through the water away from me, towards a junction in the tunnel. I hurried after him. Through the tunnels we went, left then right. Thus we made our way hastily through the underground labyrinth. Never once did Renko seem lost or doubtful. He just turned into each tunnel with confidence and purpose. And then, all at once, he stopped and stared up at the stone ceiling above us. I stood behind him, perplexed. I could see no difference between this tunnel and any of the other half-dozen we had just come through. And then, for some reason unknown to myself, Renko ducked underneath the foul-smelling water. Moments later, he came up with the rock the size of a man's fist. Then he climbed up out of the water and stood astride the narrow ledge that lined the tunnel, and with his newfound rock began to hit the underside of one of the stone slabs that formed the ceiling of the tunnel. Bang, bang, bang. Renko waited for a moment, then he repeated the same sequence. Bang, bang, bang. It was a code of some sort. Renko stepped down into the water, and we both stared up at the wet stone ceiling in silence, waiting for something to happen. Nothing happened. We kept waiting. I noticed a small symbol carved into the corner of the stone slab that Renko had been assailing. It was a carving of the circle with a double V inscribed within it. And then all of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. A series of muffled whumps could be heard from the other side of the ceiling, someone repeating Renko's code. Renko sighed with relief, and he stood up on the ledge again and pounded out a new sequence of thumps. Moments later, the whole square-shaped section of the ceiling slid away, grinding loudly above its neighbours, revealing a dark, cavern-like space above us. Renko immediately climbed up out of the water and disappeared into the hole in the ceiling. I followed. I came up inside a most splendid room, an enormous vault-like chamber lined on all four sides with magnificent golden images. The walls were made of solid stone blocks, each one 10 feet wide and probably as thick. There was no obvious door except for a smaller stone, this one only 6 feet in height, set within one of the sturdy walls. I was in the vault of the Hurricancha. is how I'm going to go with that pronunciation. A single flaming torch illuminated the cavernous space. It was held by a burly Incan warrior. 3 other, equally large warriors stood behind the torchbearer, glaring at me. There was another person in the vault, however, an elderly woman, and she had eyes only for Renko. She was a handsome woman, with grey hair and wrinkled skin, and I imagine that in her prime she must have been a strikingly beautiful woman. She was dressed simply in a white cotton robe and a gold and emerald headdress, and I must say that in her simple white attire she looked angelic, almost heavenly, like a priestess of some... Boom! I spun at the sudden noise. Renko did too. Boom! It seemed to come from the other side of the walls, someone pounding on the outside of the stone door. I froze in horror. Spaniards. Hernando. They were trying to get in. The old priestess said something to Renko. Renko replied quickly, and he gestured towards us. Boom! Boom! The old priestess then turned hurriedly to a stone pedestal behind her. I saw on the pedestal an object covered with purple silk-like cloth. The priestess picked up the object, cloth and all, and despite the insistent pounding on the walls, handed it solemnly to Renko. I still could not see what lay beneath the cloth. However, it was about the size, whatever it was about the size and shape of a human head. Renko took the object respectfully. Boom! Boom! Why was he moving so slowly? I wondered incredulously, as my eyes darted to the shuddering stone walls around us. Once the object was safely in his hands, Renko slowly removed its cloth, and I saw it, and for a moment I could do nothing but stare. It was the most beautiful, and yet at the same time most fearsome-looking idol I had ever seen. It was completely black, carved out of a square block of a very unusual type of stone. It was rough and sharp at the edges, the workmanship crude, uneven. Out of the middle of the block had been carved the visage of a fierce mountain cat with its jaws bared wide. It looked as if the cat, deranged with rage and fury, had managed to push its head out of the very stone itself. Imperfections within the rock, thin rivulets of the most lustrous shade of purple ran vertically down the cat's face, making the image appear even more fearsome, if indeed such thing were possible. Renko covered the idol once again. As he did so, the old priestess stepped forward and placed something around his neck. It was a thin leather cord with a dazzling green gemstone attached to it, a magnificent shining emerald that was easily the size of a man's ear. Renko accepted the gift with a solemn bow, and then turned quickly to face me. We must go now, said he. Then, with the idol under his arm, he made for the hole in the floor. I hurried after him. The 4 burly warriors all took hold of the great stone slab that would cover our exit. The old priestess did not move. Renko climbed down into the sewer. I lowered myself after him. As I did so, however, I noticed something quite peculiar. The vault was silent. Pounding outside had stopped, and as I pondered this curiosity some more, I realised with some dread that the pounding had in fact ceased some goodly time before. It was then that the entrance to the vault exploded inwards. A great flash of white flared out around the edges of the huge stone doorway, and an instant later the whole 6-foot doorstone blasted out into 1,000 fragments, showering the vault room with fist-sized rocks. I couldn't explain it. A battering ram could not have possibly fragmented so large a stone so instantaneously. And then the smoke and dust in the doorway cleared, and I saw the great black barrel of a cannon in the space where the doorstone had been. My mind reeled. They had blown open the vault doors with a cannon. Come on, Renko called from the sewer beneath me. I immediately started lowering myself into the hole, just as the first Spanish soldiers came charging in through the dust cloud, firing their muskets in every direction. As I disappeared through the hole in the floor, the last thing I saw was Captain Hernando Pizarro striding into the vault room with a pistol in his hand. His eyes were wild, and his head turned this way and that as he searched for the vault for the idol that he so longed for. And then, in a single horrifying instant, I saw Hernando look down in my direction and stare directly into my eyes. I slashed madly through the dark sewer tunnels, trying with all my might to keep up with Renko. As I did so, I heard shouts in Spanish echoing off the hard stone walls of the tunnels. Saw long, ominous shadows stretching out around the corner behind us. Ahead of me, Renko plunged onwards through the filthy water with the Incan idol under his arm. We hastened through the tunnels, waist deep in the water, ducking left, bending right, weaving our way through the dark stone labyrinths back towards the river entrance and freedom. After a while, however, I began to notice we were racing in the wrong direction. Renko was not heading back towards the river entrance. Where are we going? I called forward. Just move, he called back. I turned a corner as a torch on the wall above my head was blasted from its mount by a musket shot. I turned and saw a team of 6 conquistadors wading through the tunnel behind me, flaming torchlight of the passageway glinting off their helmets. They're right behind us, I called. Then run faster. The more musket shots rang out loud as thunderclaps, deafening me. Their projectiles exploded against the damp stone walls around us. Just then, ahead of me, I saw Renko leap up onto a ledge and push up with his shoulder against a stone slab in the ceiling. A slab which I saw bore in its corner the same mysterious symbol that I had seen before, the circle with the double V inside it. I leapt up onto the ledge after him and helped him heave the stone upwards, revealing the starry night sky. Renko climbed out first and I followed immediately behind him. We were standing in a narrow cobblestone street of some sort. Impenetrable grey walls lined both sides of the alleyway. I hurriedly began to replace the stone slab when all of a sudden a musket shot from within the tunnel pinged against the edge of the hole, narrowly missing my fingers. Never mind, come on this way, said Renko, pulling me down the tiny street. The walls on either side of me became indistinguishable blurs of grey as we all but flew through the crooked alleyways of Cuzco with Hernando's soldiers ever closer behind us. As we evaded our pursuers, every now and then we would see brigades of Spanish troops running through the streets, racing for the ramparts. We also, I am ashamed to say, saw stakes not unlike those outside the city walls. They were set up in every one of the city's plazas, row after row of stakes, upon which were impaled the horribly mutilated bodies of captured Incan warriors. These warriors had their hands, heads, and genitals hacked off. In one such plaza, Renko saw an Incan longbow hanging from one of the desecrated corpses. He seized it and the quiver full of arrows on the ground beside it, and then ducked back into the maze of alleyways. I followed close behind him, not daring to let him out of my sight. At length, however, Renko turned abruptly and entered a building of some sort. It was a squat stone structure, remarkably solid. In fact, so solid it almost looked fortified. We passed through several outer rooms before we descended a flight of stone steps and came to a very large subterranean hall. The hall was divided into 2 levels, one wide lower level and an upper landing that was a little more than a balcony that ran around the circumference of the hall. But it was the lower story that held my attention. There were nearly 100 holes in the dirt floor of this hall, pits over which a network of thin stone bridges passed. With a surge of dread, I realised where we were. We were in an Incan dungeon. I was reminded of the fact that these Incans had not yet discovered iron, hence they had no bars to create cages. A pit, I saw, was their answers to this dilemma. I looked up at the balcony that overlooked the lower floor. It was a guard walk for the prison guards patrol while they looked down on the prisoners. Renko didn't miss a step. He just marched out onto one of the narrow stone bridges and peered down into the holes beneath it. Wails and shouts erupted from below, and the wretched, starving prisoners who had been left in their pits when the siege began a week earlier. Renko stopped above one of the pits. I followed him out onto the stone bridge and looked down into the dirty hole, and truly, this is what I saw. The pit itself must have been at least 5 paces deep, with sheer earthen walls. Escape was impossible. At the bottom of the dirty well sat a man of average size, but filthy and putrid. Although he was thin, this man did not seem distressed, nor was he shouting like the rest of the poor, forlorn creatures in the prison hall. He just sat with his back pressed up against the wall of his pit, looking, if anything, relaxed and at ease. His composure, that wanton coolness of criminals around the world, made my skin crawl. I wondered what Renko could want with such a character. "Sario," said Renko. The criminal smiled. "Why, if it isn't the good Prince Renko." "I need your help," said Renko directly. The prisoner seemed to find this humorous. "I cannot imagine what the good prince could possibly want with my skills," the criminal laughed. "What is it, Renko? Now that your kingdom is in ruins, are you thinking of embarking upon a life of crime?" Renko looked back towards the entrance to the underground chamber, watching for Spaniards. I shared his concern. We had been in this dungeon too long already. "I will only ask you this once, Bessario," said Renko firmly. "If you choose to help me, I will take you out of here. If you do not choose, so then I will leave you to die in this pit." "An interesting choice," remarked the criminal. "Well?" The criminal Bessario stood. "Get me out of this hole." Renko immediately went to fetch a wooden ladder resting against the far wall. For my part, I was worried about Hernando and his men. They could arrive at any moment, and here Renko was bargaining with a convict. I hurried over to the door through which we had entered this prison hall. When I got there, I peered around the stone door frame and saw the dark, demon-like figure of Hernando Pizarro striding down the stairs towards me. My blood curled at the sight. The wild brown eyes, the hooked black moustache, scraggly black beard that had not been shaved for weeks. I whirled back inside the doorway and started running. "Renko!" Renko had only just lowered the ladder into Bizarrio's pit when he turned and saw the first Spanish soldier come charging into the prison hall behind me. Renko's hands moved quickly, and in an instant he had his longbow raised with an arrow drawn back to his ear. He let fly with the missile, and it streaked across the room, careering right for my head. I ducked, and the arrow smacked into the forehead of the soldier behind me. His feet flew out from under him, and he was thrown to the floor in a heavy heap. I rushed out onto the network of stone bridges, ran quickly over the foul dungeon pits. More conquistadors entered the prison hall behind me, Hernando among them, firing their muskets wildly. By this time, Bessario had emerged from his pit, and now he and Renko were running across the wide section of the dirt floor at the far end of the prison hall. "Alberto, this way," Renko called, pointing at the wide stone doorway at the end of the dungeon. I saw the opening at the other end of the hall, saw a solid, squared-off boulder suspended above it by a pulley like a mechanism. It wasn't a big boulder, roughly the size of a man, and it was exactly the same size and shape as the doorway beneath it. The two taut lengths of rope held it above the doorway, each rope weighed down by stone counterweights, making it easier for the prison guards standing on the elevated guard walk to raise and lower the boulder in opening. I ran for the door. Whence I felt a terrible weight slam against my back, and I was thrown forward. I fell heavily onto one of the narrow stone bridges and saw, to my surprise, that I had been pummeled from behind by a Spanish soldier. He knelt astride my body, drew his dagger, and was about to run me through when abruptly an arrow struck him in the chest. In fact, the arrow hit the soldier with such force that it knocked his rigid steel helmet clear off his head and threw him bodily off the bridge and into the pit beneath us. I looked down into the pit after him, only to see 4 bedraggled prisoners converging on him as one. I lost sight of the hapless soldier, but an instant later, I heard a scream of the most utter and absolute terror. The starving prisoners in the pit were eating him alive. I looked up just in time to see Renko slide to the ground next to me. "Come on," said he, grabbing my arm, pulling me to my feet. I got up and saw that Bessario had arrived at the far doorway. Musket fire rang out all around us, the rounds kicking up bright orange sparks as they bounced off the stone bridge beneath us. Just then, a stray round hit one of the ropes that held the squared off boulder suspended above the stone doorway at the far end of the hall. With a sharp twang, the rope snapped and the boulder began to lower itself in the doorway. Beneath it, Bessario looked up in horror and back at Renko. No, Renko breathed as he saw the descending boulder. The doorway, 40 paces away from us, and the only way out of the dungeon was being sealed up. I evaluated the distance, took in the speed at which the boulder was grinding down to the square stone opening. There was no way we could make it. The doorway was too far away, the boulder descending too rapidly. In a few moments we would be sealed inside the dungeon, trapped and at the mercy of my bloodthirsty countrymen, who were at the very moment racing out onto the network of stone bridges behind us, firing their muskets. Nothing could save us now. Renko obviously did not see it that way. Despite the roaring body of musketeers behind us, the young prince quickly looked about himself and spied the rigid steel helmet of the Spanish soldier who had fallen into the pit beneath me. He dived for it, grabbed it, and then turned and threw it side-handed, sliding it across the dusty floor of the dungeon towards the rapidly closing doorway. The helmet slid across the dirt floor, spinning laterally as it did so, its silver-ridged peak glinting in the firelight. The boulder in the doorway kept descending, grinding against the sides of the stone opening. 3 feet, 2 feet, 1 foot. At which moment the rapidly spinning helmet slid into the threshold of the doorway and wedged itself perfectly in between the descending boulder and the dirt-covered floor, stopping the boulder downward movement. Now the thin boulder stood poised, a bare foot above the floor, balanced on top of the helmet's rigid steel peak. I looked at Renko, astonished. "How did you do that?" said I. "Never mind," said he. "Go." We ran off the bridge together and dashed across the wide section of the dirt floor that led to the partially open doorway where Bessario was waiting for us. In a dark corner of my mind, I wondered why Bessario hadn't just run away while Renko was occupied saving me. Perhaps he thought he stood a better chance of survival staying with Renko, or maybe there was some other reason. Frighteningly loud musket fire rang out all around us as Renko dropped down on to his behind and slid feet first through the narrow gap between the boulder and the floor. Bessario followed. My slide was somewhat less graceful. I dived headfirst onto the dust-covered floor and wriggled clumsily on my chest through the gap and out onto a stone-walled tunnel on the other side. I was getting to my feet just as Renko kicked the helmet from under the boulder, and the great square-shaped stone completed its sealing of the doorway with a loud whump. I sighed, breathless. We were safe for the moment. "Come on, we must hurry," said Renko. "It's time we said farewell to this wretched city." Back in the alleyways, running post-haste, Renko led the way with Bessario behind him, and me last of all. At one point, we came across a stockpile of Spanish weapons. Bessario took a longbow and a quiver full of arrows, Renko a quiver, a rough leather satchel into which he placed the idol, and a sword. For my own part, I took a long, glistening sabre, for indeed, although I may be a humble monk, I hail from a family that has bred some of the finest fencers in all of Europe. "This way," said Renko, charging up a flight of stone steps. We hurried up the stairs and came to a series of uneven roofs. Renko hastened out across the rooftops, hurdling low, dividing walls, leaping across the small gaps between the different buildings. Bessario and I followed until at last Renko fell to the ground behind a low wall. His chest heaved as he breathed, rising and falling quickly. He looked out over the low wall above him. I did the same. What I saw was this: a wide cobblestone plaza, filled with perhaps 24 Spanish troops and as many horses. Some of the horses were freestanding, while others stood harnessed to a variety of wagons and carts. On the far side of the plaza, set into the outer wall of the city, stood a large wooden gate. This gate, however, was not indigenous to Cuzco, but was a rather ugly appendage affixed to the city's stone gateway by my countrymen after the city had been seized. Positioned directly in front of the enormous wooden gate was a large flatbed wagon drawn by 2 horses, who faced in towards the city, away from the gate itself. Mounted on the back of this wagon was a sizable cannon pointed out in the other direction. Nearer to us, at the base of the building on which we now sat, stood about 30 miserable-looking Incan prisoners. A long length of black rope was threaded through the steel manacles that each prisoner wore around his wrists, binding them all of them together in a long, dejected row. "What are we going to do now?" I inquired of Renko anxiously. "We're leaving." "How?" "Through there," said he, indicating the gate on the far side of the plaza. "What about the sewer entrance?" said I, thinking it would be the most obvious escape route. "A thief never uses the same entrance twice," said Bazzario. "At least not once he has been detected. Isn't that right, Prince?" "Correct," said Renko. I turned to appraise the criminal Bazzario, who was in fact a rather handsome man, despite his grimy appearance, and he smiled broadly, his eyes twinkling. The smile of a man happy to be part of an adventure. I could not say that I shared his joy. Now Renko began to rummage through his quiver. He pulled out some arrows whose points had been wrapped in cloth, creating round, bulbous heads. "Good," said he, looking about himself and finding a lighted torch hanging on the wall nearby. "Very good. What are you planning to do?" I inquired. Renko did not appear to hear me. He merely stared out at the 3 horses standing unattended on the far side of the plaza. "Renko," I pressed, "what are you planning to do?" At which point Renko turned to face me, and a wry smile crossed his face. One thing I really like about the Matthew Reilly characters is that they'll always have something like in their past, or they'll just have this random skill that is just really perfect for exactly the situation they're in. So see where it kind of mentions about Alberto picking up the weapon that he chose, but that actually he came from like a family of like great fencers, is just such like, it's such a little an aside to the character, but you find these little pockets of backstory throughout all of sort of Matthew Reilly's characters in all of his books, which I think is really good, because obviously, you know, all of the characters need to add to the story, and you just kind of get to know that they'll bring in this really great little snippet of information at some point. So yeah, so that's just like a really nice little bit that I like about those Matthew Reilly characters that we kind of get to see throughout all of his books, really, not just this one. Just gonna take a quick break to get another log on the fire, and hopefully you'll join me back in a few minutes to carry on with the next chapter. Okay, welcome back everyone. So we've got the fire going now, and we're gonna just carry on for the next chapter, maybe 2 chapters, which will probably take us until the fire burns back down, and hopefully that'll be just a nice little way for you guys to spend your evening with us in the book club. I stepped out into the wide open plaza with my hands folded inside my saturated monk's cloak and my sodden hood pulled lower over my wet hair. I kept my head bowed as I crossed the plaza, stepping deftly aside as clusters of soldiers ran past me, ducking quickly as horses wheeled about in my direction, desperate not to attract any attention. Renko guessed that the soldiers in the plaza would not yet know what a renegade Spanish monk, me, and was aiding the Incan raiding party. As such, so long as they did not notice my soggy clothing, I should be able to get near the 3 unattended horses and bring them over to a nearby alleyway where Renko and Bessario could mount them. But first I had to clear a passage to the gate, which meant getting the flatbed wagon with a cannon on it out of our path. That task would be harder. It required that I accidentally scare the 2 horses harnessed to the wagon. Thus I carried concealed within my sleeve one of Renko's sharply pointed arrows ready to go. God forgive me. Surreptitiously jab one of the poor creatures as I walked past them. I crossed the plaza slowly, careful to keep my eyes averted, not daring to lock eyes with anyone. As in the other plazas around the city, this one had stakes driven into the ground all around it. Severed heads were impaled upon them. The blood on the heads was fresh and it trickled down the stakes on the ground. My fear was extreme as I passed them. Such would be my fate if I didn't get out of Cuzco soon. The gate came into my view, and with that the flatbed wagon that stood in front of it. I saw the horses and tightened my grip on the arrow inside my sleeve. 2 more steps and... "Hey, you!" barked a coarse voice from somewhere behind me. I froze, did not look up. A large soldier with a pot belly stepped in front of me, so that he stood between myself and the 2 horses. He wore his pointed conquistador's helmet perfectly, and his voice was laced with authority. A senior soldier. "What are you doing here?" he said curtly. Said I. I'm sorry, so sorry. I was trapped in the city and I... "Get back to your quarters. This isn't a safe area. There are Indians in the city. We think they're after the captain's idol." Couldn't believe it. I was so close to my objective and now I was being turned away. I reluctantly made to leave when suddenly a strong hand landed on my shoulder. "A moment, monk," the soldier began, but he cut himself off abruptly as he felt the dampness of my cloak. "What the—" Just then, sharp whistling sound filled the air around me and then thwack! An arrow smacked into the big soldier's face, shattering his nose, causing an explosion of blood that splattered all over my face. The soldier dropped like a stone. The other soldiers in the plaza saw him fall and whirled about, searching for the source of the danger. Suddenly, a second whistling sound filled the air, and this time a flaming arrow flew down from one of the darkened rooftops surrounding the plaza and shot low over the flatbed wagon in front of me and slammed hard into the big wooden gate behind it. Shouts filled the air as the conquistadors opened fire on the shadowed source of the arrows. I, however, was looking at something else entirely. I was looking at the cannon on top of the flatbed wagon, or more particularly at the fuse protruding from the breech of the cannon on top of the flatbed wagon. The fuse was alight. The flaming arrow, I did not know at the time, but I understand now that it was Bessario who fired it, had been so well aimed that it had lit the fuse on the cannon. I did not wait for what would happen next. I just ran for the 3 unattended horses as quickly as I could, for no sooner did I reach them than the cannon on the flatbed wagon went off. It was the loudest noise I had ever heard in my life. A monstrous blast of such intensity and power that it shook the world under me. A billowing cloud of smoke shot out from the cannon's barrel, and the big wooden gate in front of it snapped like a twig. When the smoke cleared before it, a gaping 10-foot hole could be seen in the lower half of the giant gate. The horses harnessed to the flatbed wagon bolted at the sudden thunderous blast. They reared on their hind legs and took flight, galloping off into the alleyways of Cuzco, leaving the damaged gate wide open. The 3 horses I had been charged with procuring reared too. One of them bolted and ran off, but the other 2 calmed quickly as I held them firmly by their reins. The Spanish soldiers were still firing blindly up into the shadowy rooftops. I looked up into the darkness. Renko and Bessario were nowhere to be seen. "Monk!" someone suddenly called from behind me. I turned and saw Bessario come running up with his longbow in his hand. "Well, you couldn't have fouled this up any more, could you, Monk?" said he with a smile, and he leapt up into the saddle of one of the horses. "All you had to do was scare the horses." "Where's Renko?" I inquired. "He's coming," said Bessario. Just then a series of shrill, angry screams swept across the plaza. I turned instantly and saw the row of manacled Incan prisoners charge as one at the Spaniards into the plaza. The Incans were free, no longer joined together by the length of black rope. Then suddenly I heard a death scream and saw Renko up on one of the rooftops, standing over a fallen conquistador. Hurriedly taking the fallen man's pistol, while 6 more Spaniards hustled up the stairs on the side of the building chasing after him. Renko looked down at me and cried, "Alberto, Bessario, the gate, go for the gate." "What about you?" I called. "I'll be all right behind you," Renko called back as he ducked under a musket shot. "Just go, go." I leapt up into the saddle of the second horse. "Come on," Bessario cried, kicking his horse. I spurred my own steed and shot off the mark, turning the beast sharply so that it charged towards the gate. It was then that I turned in my saddle and saw a most amazing sight. I saw an arrow pointed not at a flaming one, soar across the plaza from one of the rooftops. Trailing behind it, wobbling like the undulating body of a snake, was a long length of rope, black rope, the rope that had bound the row of Incan prisoners together. The arrow shot over my head and with a firm smacking sound lodged in the intact upper half of the big wooden gate. No sooner had I hit the gate than I saw the entire length of rope behind it go taut. And then I spotted Renko at the other end of the rope, up on one of the rooftops, standing with his legs blade wide, with his newfound satchel draped over his right shoulder. Saw him lash the leather belt of his Spanish pantaloons over it and grab hold of the belt with one hand. Then he leapt off the roof and slid, down the length of the rope over the entire plaza, hanging onto the belt with one hand. Some Spanish soldiers opened fire on him, but the dashing young prince just used his free hand to pull his pistol from his waistband and fire it at them, while he slid at an incredible speed down the rope. I spurred my steed on, increased her speed, and pulled her in at the full gallop under Renko's rope just as he reached the end of his slide. He released his grip on the belt and dropped down perfectly onto the rump of my horse. In front of us, Bessario leapt like a seasoned horseman through the enormous hole in the wooden gate. Renko and I followed close behind him, riding double, bolting through the gate amid a hail of wild gunshots. We burst out into the cold night air, riding hard across the massive stone slab that formed a bridge over the city's northern moat, and the first thing I heard as I raced across the bridge was a roar of total and utter jubilation from the hordes of Incan warriors in the valley before me. I love and hate this book because of how much it just chops and changes in between William Race in the present day back into the Renko and Alberto and now Bessario back in that 1500s, because all you want to do is just get to that. You're so excited of the pace of it and the excitement of just all of the action, just every single page. You just, like, we're about to now go back to William Race, but absolutely I just want more and more and more of what's happening back in back with the Incas, sort of back in the 1500s, and that dare and escape that they had from all the prison and from Cuzco. So yeah, it's so frustrating, but it just makes me so excited to read the next page and the next chapter. "How's it going?" a voice said suddenly. Race glanced up from the manuscript and for a moment was disorientated. He looked out through the small window to his right and saw a sea of snow-capped mountains and an endless expanse of clear blue sky. He shook his head. He'd been so absorbed in the story that he'd forgotten he was on board the Army cargo plane. Troy Copeland stood in front of him. He was one of Nash's DARPA people, the hawk-faced nuclear physicist. "So, how's it going?" Copeland said, nodding at the bundle of paper in Race's lap. "Found the location of the idol yet?" "Well, I found the idol," Race said, flipping through the remainder of the manuscript. He was about 2/3 of the way through it. "I think I'm about to find out where they took it." "Good," Copeland said. "Keep us posted." "Hey," Race said. "Before you go, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What is Thirium-261 used for?" Copeland frowned at the question. "I think I have a right to know," Race said. Copeland nodded slowly. "Yes. Yeah, I guess you do." He took a breath. "As I think you were told before, Thirium-261 is not indigenous to Earth. It comes from a binary star system called the Pleiades, a system not far from our own. Now, as you can probably imagine, planets in binary star systems are affected by all sorts of forces because of their twin suns. Photosynthesis is doubled, gravitational effects, as well as resistance to gravity, are enormous. As such, elements found on planets in binary systems are usually heavier and denser than similar elements found here on Earth. Thirium-261 is just such an element. It was first found in petrified form in the walls of a meteor crater in Arizona in 1972. And even though the specimen there had been inert for millions of years, its potential sent shockwaves through the physics community. Why? Well, you see, on a molecular level, thirium bears a striking resemblance to the terrestrial elements uranium and plutonium. But thirium outweighs both of these earthier elements by an order of magnitude. It is denser than our two most potent nuclear elements combined, which means it is infinitely more powerful. Race began to feel a sense of dread crawling up his spine. Where was Copeland going with this? But like I said, thirium has only ever been found on Earth in petrified form. Since 1972, 2 other samples have been discovered. But again, both of those specimens were at least 40 million years old, which is of no use to anyone since petrified thirium is inert, so chemically dead. What we have been waiting for the past 27 years is the discovery of a specimen of live thirium, a specimen that is still active on a molecular level, and now we think we've found it, in a meteorite that crash landed in the jungles of Peru 500 years ago. "So what does thirium do?" asked Race. "A lot," Copeland said, "a whole lot. For one thing, its potential as a power source is astronomical. Conservative estimates predict that a properly constituted thirium reactor would generate electrical energy at a rate 600 times greater than all the nuclear power plants in the United States combined. But there's an added bonus. Unlike our terrestrial nuclear elements, when thirium is used as a core element in a fusion reactor, it decomposes with 100% efficiency. In other words, it leaves no contaminated waste byproducts. As such, it is unlike any power source on this Earth. Uranium waste must be discarded in radioactive rods. Hell, even gasoline produces carbon monoxide. But thirium is clean. It is a perfectly efficient power source. Perfect. It is so internally pure that, based on our modelling, a raw sample of it would emit only microscopic quantities of passive radiation. Race held up his hand. All right, that all sounds great. But last I heard, DARPA wasn't in the business of providing America with power stations. What else does thirium do? Copeland smiled. Thought. Professor, for the last 10 years, DARPA's Tactical Technology Office has been working on a new weapon. A weapon unlike anything this world has ever seen. It is a device codenamed Supernova. As soon as Copeland said the word, something twigged in the back of Race's mind. He recalled a conversation he'd overheard between Copeland and Nash soon after he'd boarded the plane. A conversation in which they'd mentioned a break-in at Fairfax Drive and the theft of a device called a supernova. What exactly is this supernova? Put simply, Copeland said, The supernova is the most powerful weapon ever devised in the history of mankind, what we call a planet killer. A what? A planet killer. A nuclear device so powerful that when detonated it would completely destroy nearly a third of the Earth's mass. With a third of its mass gone, the Earth's orbit would spin around the sun. The Earth's orbit around the sun would be corrupted. Our planet would spin out of control, out into space, further and further away from the sun. Within minutes of the Earth's surface, what was left of it, would be too cold to sustain human life. Supernova, Professor Race, the first man-made device that is capable of ending life as we know it on this planet, hence its namesake, the name we give to an exploding star. Ray swallowed. In fact, he felt positively weak. A million questions flooded his mind. Like, why would someone build such a device? What possible reason could there be for creating a weapon that could kill everyone on this planet, including its own creators? And all that considered, why was his country building it? Copeland continued, "The thing is, Professor, the supernova that we have at present is a prototype, a workable shell. That device, the device that was stolen from DARPA headquarters last night, is useless. For the simple reason that the operation of the supernova requires the addition of one thing, thirium." Oh, great, Race thought. In this regard, Copeland said, the supernova is not all that dissimilar to a neutron bomb. It's a fission device, which means it operates on the principle of splitting the thirium atom. Two conventional thermonuclear warheads are used to split a subcritical mass of thirium, unleashing the mega explosion. Okay, wait a second, Ray said. Let me get this straight. You guys have built a weapon that is capable of destroying the planet, that is dependent on an element you don't even have yet. That's correct, Copeland said. But why? Why is America building a weapon that can do all this? Copeland nodded. That's always a difficult question to answer. I mean, there are two reasons, a deeper voice said suddenly from behind Race. It was Frank Nash. Nash nodded to the manuscript in Race's lap. Have you found the location of the idol yet? Not yet. Then I'll make this quick so you can get back to work. First of all, what I'm about to tell you is of the utmost secrecy. There are 16 people in the country who know what I'm about to tell you, and 5 of them are on this plane. If you mention any of this to anyone after the completion of the mission, you'll spend the next 75 years in jail. Do you understand me, Professor? Uh-huh. Good. The justification for the construction of the supernova is twofold. The first reason is this. About 18 months ago, it was discovered that state-funded scientists in Germany had begun the secret construction of a supernova. Our response was simple. If they're going to build one, then so are we. Great logic, Ray said. It's exactly the same logic Oppenheimer used to justify building the atomic bomb. Geez, you're standing on the back of giants there, Colonel, Ray said dryly. And the second reason? Nash said, Professor, have you ever heard of a man named Dietrich von... Choltitz? No. Commanding General Dietrich von Choltitz was the Nazi general in charge of the German forces in Paris at the time of the Nazis' withdrawal from France in August of 1944. After it became apparent that the Allies were going to retake Paris, Hitler sent him a communique. It ordered him to set thousands of incendiary devices all over the city before he left, and then, after he was gone, to blow Paris sky high. Now, to his credit, he disobeyed this order. He didn't want to go down in history as the man who destroyed Paris. But what is important here is the logic behind Hitler's order. If he couldn't have Paris, no one could. So what are you saying? Ray said wearily. Professor, the supernova is but one evolutionary step in a high-level strategic plan that has existed in the US foreign policy for the last 50 years. That plan is called the Choltitz Plan. What do you mean? What I mean is this. Did you know that throughout the Cold War, the US Navy had standing orders to ensure that at any given time there are a number of nuclear, ballistic missiles, submarines stationed at certain strategic locations around the world? Do you know what those submarines were there for? What? The orders those subs had were very simple. Should the Soviet Union in any way defeat the United States in any sudden or unforeseen engagement, those boomers had orders to launch a rain of nuclear missiles, not just on Soviet targets, but on every major city on the European and US mainlands. What? That's the plan, Professor Race. We can't have it. No one can. But this is on a global scale, Race said in disbelief. That's right, that's exactly right. And therein lies the reason for the creation of the supernova. The United States is the most dominant nation on this earth. Should any nation seek to alter that situation, we will inform them of our possession of a workable supernova. If they take further steps and a conflict ensues, and the United States is beaten, or worse, crippled, then we will detonate the device. Grace felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Was this for real? Was this policy? If America could not control the world, it would destroy it. How can you build something like that? Professor Race, what if China decided to wage war against the United States? What if they won? Would you have the American people under the rule of a Chinese regime? But you'd rather die? Yes. And you take the rest of the world with you, Ray said. You guys must be the sorest losers of all time. Be that as it may, Nash said, changing his tone. The law of unintended consequences has taken its effect on this situation. News of the creation of a device with the potential to destroy the planet has brought other parties out of the woodwork. Parties who would see such a weapon as a powerful bargaining chip in their own crusades. What kind of parties? Certain terrorist groups. People who, if they got their hands on a workable supernova, hold the world to ransom. Right, Ray said. And now your supernova's been stolen, probably by terrorists. That's correct. You opened Pandora's box, didn't you, Dr. Nash? Yes. Yes, I'm afraid we did. And that is why it's imperative we get hold of that idol before anyone else does. With that, Nash and Copeland left Race alone with the manuscript once again. Race took a moment to gather his thoughts. His mind was swirling. Supernovas, global destruction, terrorist groups. He found it difficult to concentrate. He shook it all away, forced himself to focus, found his place in the manuscript again. Part where Renko and Albert Santiago had just blasted their way out of the besieged city of Cusco. And Race took a deep breath, adjusted his glasses, and entered the world of the Incas once again. I mean, how much higher can your stakes get? You've just got this nuclear bomb thrown into the mix, and there we were thinking it was just an adventure story, like, you know, just to find a little Incan idol. Yeah, this is like on the level of Indiana Jones, and oh man, the pace of it, you just want to just devour every single little bit of it. Like, it's just insane that Matthew Riley's just going to just throw in that little nuclear bomb, little gem there at the end of that chapter. Yeah, and I think fair play to Matthew Riley for pulling together all the history, the science, the technology, yeah, all of those themes going through this book. The research that went into this is just absolutely incredible. I'm so impressed with it because it does really actually feel like something that could well be going on behind the scenes in DARPA, you know, in the scientific headquarters of the world, which is a terrifying thought. But yeah, just to have it down in these pages is just, it makes it such an exciting story, just to get your head around. So I think for tonight, before we get stuck back into Renko, Prince Renko and Alberto back in Peru 500 years ago, we will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it so far. Please do get in touch. Let us know what you're thinking about it so far. I really love all of the characters. I think they're really great. I think they're really intriguing. But if you've got any sort of thoughts, wild guesses about maybe where this is going to go, if you've not already read it, if you are interested in reading the book yourself, if you want a paperback copy, I'm a massive fan of the website World of Books. I think it's worldofbooks.org. They do like resale of books, making sure that there's no one without access to books. Really, they're really good value. They've always got great offers on. 100% recommend that website. Postage is really great as well, really quick. I popped up my bookshelf the other day with a few more editions, so I'm very pleased with that order. I'll post a picture on Instagram, just so you guys can see what's on the list, maybe of a few of the future books to read. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening, guys.